My name is Aska Hisa, and I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at ICALA, and I'm welcoming you to tonight's event with Sarah Wang in conjunction with the exhibition Scratching at the Moon. Scratching at the Moon is an exhibition co-curated by artist Anna Sue Hoy and ICALA Good Works Executive Director Anne Elgood. And it's an exhibition that celebrates the work of an intergenerational group of 13 leading artists in the Asian American community whose contributions to culture are multiple, ranging from their distinctive visual arts production to their commitment to pedagogy, to their dedication to research, activism, and community engagement. This week, we received the heartbreaking news that one of the artists in the show, Young Soon Min, passed away after a prolonged illness. Young Soon was an extraordinary artist, educator, and activist, and for the artists in the show and to many in the community, she was an empowering model and mentor. Here at ICALA, we were blessed with her contributions as a valued member of our Artist Advisory Council for over a decade, and she was involved with the crafting of our mission statement, which includes the promise, ICALA is committed to upending hierarchies of race, class, gender, and culture through exhibitions, education programs, and community partnerships. ICALA fosters critique of the familiar and empathy with the different. Rest in peace, Young Soon. This exhibition will soon release a beautiful catalog later this spring. In it are transcribed conversations among the exhibition artists and fantastic essays by John Tain, Chris Kurimitsu, and tonight's guest, Sarah Wang. Sarah is a writer and editor who teaches creative writing at Barnard College. Her writing across genres focuses on mass incarceration, psychoanalysis, immigration, colonized bodies, feminism, class, and race. We have provided bio sheets for you to read on about her many accomplishments and accolades. We're so thrilled that she is in her hometown of LA for spring break and is able to share her POV tonight. We'll begin with Sarah's presentation and then stroll through the show with Sarah and the co-curators Anne and Anna. Thank you for being here.
This is one of Hetty's collages. It is my wallpaper. What's this? Can you guys hear me? What is this collage called, Hetty? A very Hetty answer. Okay, well, I thought I would start by showing you my beautiful website, talk a little bit about my work and what I do. So I was born here, and I did my undergrad and grad here, and then I've been in New York for 10 years. But a lot of my writing is still about LA, situated in LA. And so this piece I wrote last year after the Lunar New Year shooting in Monterey Park. As the news started to come in about, there's a shooter and a mass shooting, and then it happened in Monterey Park at a Lunar New Year's celebration, the news started getting closer and closer and closer to me until I realized when they released the names of the ballrooms that the shootings happened in. Actually, there was only one shooting. There was an attempted attack on the other one, but it didn't happen. That it was a ballroom that my mother and uncle have danced at for decades. So I pitched and wrote a piece about it. I also interviewed Amanda Rosho about her family's practice of doing ballroom dance too, which is really common among this older diasporic Chinese immigrant enclaves around the US. So this is a piece I wrote during COVID. Let's March 2021, when the anti-Asian attacks were really intense and ramping up. And because I live in New York, I'm not exactly sure what it was like on the ground here, but you know, in New York, everyone takes the train, and it was like a kind of terrifying time. So this is kind of a piece about that. I kind of covered a lot of stuff during that time too, but this piece is called The Intruder. So this is another piece that I did, and my editor at The Believer, which I'm not really sure exists anymore as a publication, but she suggested that I collaborate with a cartoonist. And this is actually a reported piece. I talked to a woman who she's a survivor of domestic violence and was having PTSD during COVID and the attacks on Asians. And so this is like this whole thing. And this is like an interview that they did with me at PEN America. So a lot of my writing and my work is about mass incarceration, this idea of justice, gendered violence. This is a really nice piece that that they did. This is kind of letters that I wrote with this formerly incarcerated woman. She was incarcerated for 22 years. She's a Chinese American poet. And it was this fellowship that I did where we were bridging conversations between writers on the inside and writers on the outside. And incredibly, this woman, Connie, was released from prison kind of unexpectedly after 22 years. So it's kind of amazing. We've since met in person, and we text all the time. This is a piece that I did on kind of anti-work for this socialist feminist magazine called Lux. It was a week. This is my cat and hammock. We are often in this position at home, especially in the summer. I love to take naps here with her. But this is a piece on kind of anti-work and this kind of idea of 996, the 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. work week in China. And I lived a week where I was lying very flat. So that's also a movement in China, flat life, Tangping. This is fiction. This is a short story this is actually flash fiction that was commissioned at the Atlantic. This is another piece that I had, a fiction piece in McSweeneys. This is my attempt at smut. It was also a commission. My friend Michaela Durand, who's at Pioneer Works, and she's also an amazing filmmaker, contacted me and said, she does a smut series for Pioneer Works in New York, and she asked if I would write smut. And I said, I think I can do it. And I did. That was fun to write. And then I also write poetry. So this is the piece for the Poetry Project in New York. Okay, that's it for this. And so I'm gonna do a reading of, if I stand here and talk, can you still hear me? Of, I'm gonna unplug this because you don't need to see it. Of my piece for the show, which is an exhibition catalog essay about, well, Anna asked me to write something to kind of like maybe situate the show and the catalog in a cultural time and place. And I went to art school, and I was hanging out a lot in the aughts around in Chinatown and Culver City, hanging out with all the other MFA kids doing all kinds of nasty stuff. But I'll just read it, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. Maybe I want to hold this. Okay. Some people remember the night at Hop Louie. when I took my underwear off on the dance floor, while rolling around the filthy linoleum, flailing my legs up into the air. The bartender wanted to kick me out, though Bill, an older Chinese man who co-owned the place, seemed amused by my improvisational, purposefully clumsy dance. Months later, I was hanging out with someone who lived in Chinatown near Hop Louie. "That was you?" he asked. Somehow it had come up in conversation. I was surprised he'd known about it. "Everyone was talking about it. I was bummed I wasn't there," he said. He seemed impressed or scandalized, both of which were fine with me. I was glad my performance had made its way around and served as a framing device for who I was. It was the early aughts. I had a cream 1982 Mercedes that I drove from Herman and Highland Park to art school, where I was trying to figure out how to be a writer. I did a lot of filthy things back then. I taunted a prim man who ran an art space by stripping off my clothes and dancing around his living room at a party while he held onto his wine glass, trying to be civilized in his own house. Another night in the kitchen at a party in Eagle Rock, when someone claimed that period blood smelled bad, I yanked my tampon out from inside my body to prove him wrong. Everyone scattered like cockroaches when the light flicks on. The party was full of artists and art school students, yet no one would smell the tampon to corroborate my assertion. The act had a repellent effect. People refused to come near me the rest of the night. There were many more ways I behaved that repulsed people in the decade of my 20s when I was an undergraduate at UCLA, getting my MFA at CalArts, and the interstitial spaces where I was trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do and how I could possibly do it. I didn't yet possess the clarity of deciphering my own desire, nor had I developed a language that I could myself understand or communicate clearly to others. But my actions functioned as a kind of speech. It was the era of the Asian fetish, geisha house performing yellowface on Hollywood Boulevard, eating sushi off naked Asian women's bodies. The characters Fook Me and Fook You in the Austin Powers film Goldmember, galleries named Black Dragon Society and Happy Lion opening in Chinatown. My worst fear, aside from being fetishized, was being a model minority. I studied literature in undergrad and writing in grad school, but it took me decades to begin producing the text that I wanted to write, which was in part due to the natural trajectory of someone figuring out their creative work through time, but also due to the evolution of the landscapes around her. The structures in place that dictate how a person is able to speak, and just as importantly, unable to speak, can be hostile, nurturing, safe, deadly, or anything on a spectrum between these stations. When I was a young person, simultaneously yearning to understand the world and my place in it, I felt myself pushing up against these forces that constructed the culture and politics I was to define myself within. The friction between a pre-woke culture, if I can use the term with sardonic intonation, and myself as a racialized young woman from an immigrant working class family was always present in my body, building up and finding recurrent exit through action. Society may not have provided us the language then, but when we weren't silenced, we were often able to make up our own. The prevailing vibe in the Los Angeles art scene at the time was casually cross-disciplinary. Bands like D'Argento, formed by Anna Sue Hoy and Giles Miller, featuring Amy Yao and Jason Taylor, played at Ooga Booga. Wendy Yao's Chinatown space. Across the courtyard at the Mountain Bar, we went to Eileen Miles and Maggie Nelson's book launches, hosted by Veronica Gonzalez Peña's Rocky Point Press. Semiotext editor Hediel Kolti ran a film series, Deleuze from A to Z, at Mandrake Bar, a space co-founded by artists Flora Wegman, Drew Heitzler, and Justin Beal in Culver City. Busy Gangness, one half of the band Telepathy, danced with Wegman and their group Meganet at the Getty on Friday nights. Every week we went to Wildness, Wu Sang's night at the Trans Bar Silver Platter, where we once watched Ron Athey pull a long metal chain, slick with lube, out his ass and swing it around over our heads while singing an aria. Asma Maroof and Daniel Pineda, the duo comprising Nguzu, DJ'd downtown at La Cita with Ashlyn Mines, aka Total Freedom. Later, Maruf and Pineda with Fatima Al-Qadiri and Jay Cush formed Future Brown, naming the speculative skin color of humans when the minority majority would inevitably take over the globe. Wendy Yao started Ooga Booga in 2004 in a tiny upstairs space that belied the outsized influence it would have on Los Angeles culture. The store, which closed in 2019 but still exists online, hosted countless music shows, art shows, free community zine-making afternoons, and sold artist-made objects that anyone could buy. A Tropicalia mixtape by Malik Gaines, vials of hand-blended perfume by Annika Yee and Maggie Pang tucked into a raw cedarwood bottle, ceramic ashtrays by Anna Suhoy. On the surface, it was a cool store that hosted fun events in Chinatown, but its praxis and intentionality had everything to do with Wendy's background as a second-generation Chinese-American immigrant who came from the DIY punk scene and played in the palindromic, all-Asian riot girl band Emily's Sassy Lime. Being racialized is everywhere and nowhere all at once. It is nowhere when I'm flipping through racks at the thrift store or daydreaming about all the things I will tell my psychoanalyst. It is everywhere when someone, laughing, pushes the check toward me at a group dinner and says, "Sarah can figure it out." It is everywhere when, during an opening on Chungking Road, upon hearing two Chinese women collecting cans and arguing loudly in Cantonese, an art school colleague of my half-Thai friend turns to her and asks, "What are they saying?" The formation of Ooga Booga in the context of immigrant culture was not only about the expression of arriving from the outside and looking in, but also a way for Wendy to build a world for herself and other people who felt outside of dominant cultures. If you ached for a connection or hadn't yet discovered the communities where you felt a sense of belonging, a chance encounter with Ooga Booga while wandering around Chinatown could be a porthole into other worlds. You might discover a new band, dance with a stranger, read about how to unionize a museum, learn how to make a zine, watch a new film by an artist you didn't yet know, make kawaii bento-style rice ball characters, and eat free Asian snacks. Nancy Stella Soto remembers buying fashion magazines there that you couldn't get anywhere else. Later, she sold her eponymous line at the store when she started her clothing label. I remember Hetty taking sedatives before introducing the Deleuze from A to Z screenings to quell his extreme shyness and anxiety. Organizing the events was a way for him to bring people together and show his favorite films that weren't often available otherwise. We watched the films about other misfits and societal cast-offs whose signifiers rippled energetically through our own group. He showed films about the isolation and joy of people segregated from society in leper colonies. Standing behind the laptop, queuing films at Mandrake and Mountain Bar, Hetty could act as the near invisible host who offered a little of himself through the messages encoded in the grouping of his selections. It was a way of speaking, something many of us tremendously wanted to do, but that was also exceedingly difficult, causing us a lot of pain. I spoke only Mandarin at home and spent my childhood mostly alone, reading books, hanging out with my family in diasporic Chinese enclaves in the San Gabriel Valley. I couldn't relate to the other kids at school, who all seemed to know about the same things that remained a mystery to me. What were Girl Scouts, and what did they do after school in those uniforms? Hypercolor t-shirts? Horseback riding? How did everyone else know about this stuff, and I knew nothing of their world? Meanwhile, I was immersed in a different culture, watching kung fu movies where old men with top knots and long beards flew into the sky, plotting to their enemy's chi flow. Maybe that was someone breaking my chi flow. I read Lao Fuzi comics, where the balding characters, Dumpy Big Potato and skinny Old Master Q, got into trouble in the afterlife and schemed to get hair. I fell asleep in the karaoke booth while my mother sang about lusting after the agile man who could best pick betel nuts while colored lights spun around the dark room. As I aged out of childhood and into adolescence, so began an accelerated stage of acculturation, of figuring out where to buy a Stussy shirt, of plucking my eyebrows to a whisper, of listening to Nirvana and watching Reality Bites to become fluent in the particular language of cool ennui and unfulfilled desire redolent of 90s youth culture. I was a skater girl, then a raver, driving to map points located by calling a number or a voice message provided the address of a store or street corner. The accuracy of the hand-drawn map on a small square of paper would determine whether or not we drove around for hours, adrift in the outskirts of the city, and ended up at a 24-hour diner defeated, or if we joined hundreds of bodies synchronized to a single beat, condensed sweat spangling the walls of airless warehouses, and levitated the sun at dawn, dancing to save our lives. The feeling that all these kids could come together from disparate parts of the city and beyond to be a part of a community that thrived in the subversion of time and space and reality was an event of jouissance. Many of us deemed ourselves unwanted, a state of suffering that transgressed the threshold of pain into ineffable rapture when we inhabited unwanted spaces and unwanted time, dusk to dawn, and shed unwanted reality through taking psychedelic drugs, alchemizing these forms of unwantedness into a transcendent state that freed us from the oppression of our daily lives and created alternative frameworks of existence and social relations. All this is to say that I was primed for art school by my mid-20s, carrying with me the luggage of lived experience, of inhabiting outsiderness as a way to overthrow the despotic regimes of acceptable social mores. I also knew what community was, and that it existed for me in ways I could have never conceived of, but it was there for me to inhabit if I could find my way to it. These days, I teach creative writing to undergrads. My unspoken goal throughout the semester is to encourage the all-women identified student body to locate the knots inside of them that produce the tension of their lives and examine them through art. I have also come into my own in my practice to the extent that I feel able to locate my own knots, interrogating their complexities as a way to make life bearable. Mostly, this shift has happened over time, almost imperceptibly, through the practice of writing, the slow labor of building a body of work that can be disseminated into the world and live independently. When I feel the need to yank my tampon out at a party or take my underwear off on a dance floor, which I generally still do, I instead sublimate my desire into a different kind of productivity, writing. This is the privilege of what we can do as makers of things in the best of circumstances. Speak through the languages that we have created so that others may perhaps hear and speak back. So I just want to talk for like 5 minutes about my piece and this show. I think mostly, I talk a lot about like writing and hanging out and the social scene and growing up in LA, but I think the work in this show does as well. And I'm very interested in kind of why people make things, why people do the things that they do. And there's always a whole history and a lineage behind the work that they're making. And also things that people are trying to say, right, which I guess can be quite psychoanalytic. And I'm thinking of this quote by a writer, Ken Chen. Writing is a way of carving something from its context and carrying it into a realm of abstraction, which writing can also be a stand-in here for art making and other creative practices. And in thinking about the show and reading all the catalog essays, which I guess the catalog isn't out yet, but I highly recommend reading everything when it comes out. It's really, all the pieces are really good. I was thinking about kind of, this show being the first of its kind in Los Angeles, the first group show of Asian American artists in a major museum in Los Angeles, and kind of being shocked by that. And thinking about why it's important at this time and at all times to have shows like this. And I thought of Viet Thanh Nguyen's idea of narrative plenitude, and this idea is about living kind of in an economy of narrative scarcity in terms of Asian American voices and all marginalized voices. And when we live in an economy of narrative scarcity, one story, one show can make or break us. For example, Crazy Rich Asians didn't happen that long ago, but when it did, I think a lot of the dialogue around the film was, well, we haven't had anything since Joy Luck Club, which was decades ago. And a lot of us were thinking like, well, this film better be good, because if it doesn't, it's like the only thing we've had in decades. So this kind of idea that, when there's narrative scarcity, if a story fails, then we all do, right? And then also this idea that when there is narrative scarcity, the idea that you have to represent your people, so you have to go out there and be a good girl, be exemplary. But there is erasure through stories, telling only certain types of stories, having token Asian artists who are, or showing artwork that perpetuates only stereotypes. So, this idea of narrative plenitude is about the privilege of being mediocre, queer, poor, transgressive, whatever, And it's important that we tell our own stories as well. I recently finished a novel and someone read it. He was a white male, straight editor. And there is a character in my story whose mother owns a beauty shop. And the daughter ends up being a lawyer and goes to Yale Law. Well, when this editor read my novel, he said, but people like that don't go to Yale Law School. I didn't really push him on that, but I mean, there is this idea of what people can and can't do, right? But when we tell our own stories, we know that this is not true. But cultural gatekeepers, it gets into a very hairy area. Also thinking about needing alternative forms of scholarship, because anthropology and history are inherently colonial. So I just read an essay on the filmmaker Wang. Do you guys know him? He's like, does slow cinema. He's a Chinese filmmaker, documentary filmmaker. And I was trying to do my research and reading all these articles on JSTOR and all this stuff. And all of them pretty much were written by Western writers. And they would say things like, the living conditions at these factories are filthy and everyone's so poor. And, it was kind of cringe to read this stuff because it's just a different way of living, And so I started asking my networks of Asian American writers, I'm trying to find scholarly articles on Wang being written by us, not by this other eye. And so another thing that I was thinking about with his show is how important it is for people to just tell their own stories, right? And also, in teaching, my syllabus looks very different than the syllabi that I had when I was in undergrad and grad school. So many of the artists in this show are also professors and teach and are heads of departments and stuff. And it's a bit of a relief, to be able to read the stories that I want to read that I think are important to me and I think are important to this new generation of young thinkers and art makers and writers, and having it be well received. So anyway, these are some of the things that I was thinking about with my piece, and talking to other people when I was writing this piece and seeing the show. So I think that's about it for my part. Thank you so much, Anna, for asking me to write the piece, and to Oscar for inviting me to be here tonight, and everyone at the museum and all the artists. And I think we're going to do a little walkthrough right now. So I'll hand it to, yeah. Sure.
I'm questioning this idea of like Asian. This is an Asian American show, and I'm questioning this term of Asian and American, and because they, in the senses, they use it as a race, but race is really more spectrum of black and white, and somehow Asian was made up in the 60s because of the political party.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to know like what your take is on the term Asian, Asian American. How do you
I mean, I definitely was also thinking about it and about, like, you know, when the term was coined and how it was really important then in 1968. And I mean, I don't know if I have a clear answer. Maybe Anna has a better kind of framework for how she thinks about it in the context of this show. But for me personally, I still think that it is useful in the ways that we can. I mean, it's also limiting, right? And it can also be flattening and damaging, but it can also be useful if we can harness it for, you know, whatever purposes, collectivity, political purposes. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think actually about it?
I think that it is part of the erasure. Like it's almost distracting to not look at the. Oh, hi. Thank you. Like we don't look at the spectrum of Asianness and how there are people in, let's say, India or Cambodia who have the phenotype of brown skin or darker skin who are treated differently than people of East Asian background. And so I think that it can be kind of confusing in that we're not thinking of the disparities of race by grouping this monolith of Asian.
Yeah. I mean, I hope there's a day when we won't have to resort to this kind of monolith. But yeah, I don't really have any good answers for that.
No, thank you. I just wanted to like have a conversation and have your like input because I'm thinking about it a lot as
Yeah.
an artist.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay. Thanks so much for coming, you guys.